What happens when Hollywood's most beloved eccentric meets a talk show host having the worst night of his career? Well, you get one of the most uncomfortable television moments ever captured. And tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly how it all went down. This is the story of how Jeff Goldblum got kicked off Jimmy Kimmel Live in what can only be described as a complete meltdown by the host himself. Before we dive into this absolute train wreck, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what your favorite Jeff Goldblum moment is. The trouble started before Jeff even walked onto that stage. According to sources close to the production, Jimmy had been dealing with network pressure all week. The ratings were slipping. His comedy wasn't landing like it used to, and executives were breathing down his neck about the show's future. But none of that excuses what happened next. Jeff Goldblum walked onto that stage like he always does, with that signature charm and that slight smile that makes you feel like you're in on some cosmic joke. He was there to promote his latest jazz album, something he was genuinely excited about. Jimmy, however, seemed determined to turn this into something it wasn't meant to be. "So Jeff," Jimmy started, his voice carrying an edge that regular viewers might have missed. "Another jazz album. I mean, how many times can you reinvent the same thing?" Now, anyone who knows Jeff Goldblum knows that wasn't the right way to start. Jeff paused, that familiar head tilt, and you could see him processing what had just happened. "Well, Jimmy, I wouldn't say I'm reinventing anything. Music, you see, music is this living, breathing entity that evolves with each performance, each interpretation." Right. Jimmy interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "But let's be honest here, Jeff. You're an actor, a good actor. But this whole jazz thing, isn't it just a bit of a midlife crisis hobby?" The audience went quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Jeff's smile faltered for just a moment, and anyone watching could see that something had shifted in the room. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was Jimmy taking a shot at something Jeff genuinely cared about. "I'm sorry, Jimmy," Jeff said, his voice still measured, but with a new tension. "But I think you might be misunderstanding what music means to me. This isn't a hobby. I've been playing piano since I was a child. Music has been part of my life longer than acting has." Jimmy leaned back in his chair, that fake smile plastered on his face. "Come on, Jeff. We both know why you're really here. The acting work isn't coming in like it used to, so you're trying to stay relevant with this jazz thing. It's okay to admit it." That's when things got really uncomfortable. Jeff sat up straighter, his hands clasped together, and for the first time in the interview, he looked directly at Jimmy with an intensity that made everyone in that studio hold their breath. "Jimmy, I have to say, this is quite fascinating. You've invited me here tonight presumably to talk about something I'm passionate about, and instead you're trying to diminish it. Are you having a rough night? Because this feels personal." Jimmy's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Personal, Jeff? This is television. This is entertainment. I'm trying to have a real conversation here instead of the usual promotional nonsense." A real conversation. Jeff's voice rose slightly, though he maintained that distinctive cadence. "A real conversation would involve you actually listening to what I'm saying instead of waiting for your next opportunity to belittle something that brings joy to thousands of people." The camera kept rolling, but you could see the production team starting to shift nervously. Jimmy's assistant was making frantic gestures from the side of the stage, but Jimmy was too far gone to notice. "You know what, Jeff?" Jimmy said, his voice getting louder. "Maybe the problem is that you think everything you do is some kind of art form. Maybe sometimes a hobby is just a hobby." Jeff stood up from his chair. Not dramatically, not in anger, but with that deliberate grace he's known for. "Jimmy, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I came here tonight to share something I love with people who might appreciate it. If you're not one of those people, that's perfectly fine. But I won't sit here and let you mock something that means the world to me." "Sit down, Jeff," Jimmy said. And there was something in his tone that made everyone in that studio realize this had gone way too far. That's when Jeff did something that shocked everyone. He looked directly into the camera, past Jimmy, past the audience, and spoke directly to the viewers at home. "You know," Jeff said, looking directly into that camera with those piercing eyes, "I think the people watching at home deserve better than this. They deserve conversations that lift them up, not tear things down." He turned back to Jimmy, who was now visibly seething. "And Jimmy, I think you deserve better than this, too." Jimmy's face flushed red. "Don't you dare psychoanalyze me on my own show, Jeff. Sit down and finish this interview like a professional." "A professional?" Jeff's eyebrows raised, and there was something almost amused in his expression. "Now, Jimmy, with all due respect, what we're doing right now, this isn't professional. This is you working through some personal issues on national television, and I'm not going to be your punching bag." The audience was completely silent now. Even Jimmy's usual supporters in the crowd seemed uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Jimmy's band leader, who normally stays out of these moments, was looking around nervously, clearly wanting to intervene, but not knowing how. "You want to know what's not professional?" Jimmy stood up now too, his voice rising. "What's not professional is coming on my show and acting like you're above it all. Like you're too good for the questions I'm asking." Jeff shook his head slowly. "Jimmy, I never said I was above anything. I simply asked you to treat something I care about with basic respect. That's not asking too much. Basic respect." Jimmy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want respect? You're a guy who talks to dinosaurs in movies. And now you want everyone to take your piano playing seriously. The whole thing is ridiculous." That's when something shifted in Jeff's demeanor. Up until this point, he'd been patient, almost paternal in his responses, but now there was steel in his voice. "Jimmy, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've worked with some of the most talented people in the world, and I've learned something important along the way. Success isn't about tearing other people down. It's about building something meaningful." Jimmy scoffed. "Oh, here we go. The lecture from the guy who peaked in the 90s. The gasp from the audience was audible. Even Jimmy's own crew looked shocked. Jeff stood there for a moment, absorbing what had just been said, and then he did something unexpected. He smiled. "You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right. I did have some wonderful success in the 90s. Jurassic Park, Independence Day, The Fly, those were incredible experiences. But the difference between you and me is that I don't see my past success as a peak. I see it as a foundation." Jimmy was pacing now, his hands gesticulating wildly. "A foundation for what? For pretending to be a jazz musician? For fooling people into thinking you're something you're not? For growing," Jeff said simply. "For exploring, for finding new ways to connect with people. Jimmy, when was the last time you did something that scared you? When was the last time you put yourself out there in a way that made you vulnerable?" "I do that every night," Jimmy shouted. "I'm out here every night trying to make people laugh, trying to make good television." Jeff nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. You do come out here every night. But Jimmy, look around you. Look at your audience. Look at your crew. Do you see people who are enjoying themselves? Do you see people who are inspired by what's happening right now?" Jimmy glanced around the studio, and for the first time that night, he seemed to realize that everyone was staring at him with a mixture of concern and embarrassment. His house band had stopped playing entirely. His audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "You don't get to turn this around on me," Jimmy said, his voice quieter now, but still aggressive. "You don't get to come on my show and make me the bad guy." "Jimmy," Jeff said gently, "I'm not trying to make you anything. I'm trying to understand why you're so angry. What's really going on here?" Jimmy's laugh was bitter. "You want to know what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. I'm tired of actors like you thinking you can just waltz into any field and be taken seriously. You make movies, Jeff. That's what you do. Stop pretending to be something you're not." "But Jimmy," Jeff said, his voice still calm, "isn't that exactly what you're doing right now? You're pretending to be a journalist, pretending to be conducting some kind of hard-hitting interview. But what you're really doing is being cruel to someone who came here as your guest." The word cruel hung in the air like a challenge. Jimmy's face contorted with rage. "Cruel? You think I'm being cruel? You want to see cruel? Cruel is watching someone embarrass themselves on stage night after night, pretending they're a musician when everyone knows it's just a vanity project." Jeff's response was immediate and devastating in its simplicity. "Jimmy, have you ever actually listened to my music?" Jimmy paused. "What? Have you ever actually listened to any of my albums? Have you been to any of my performances? Or are you just assuming it's bad because you've decided it should be?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jimmy's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. It was clear to everyone watching that he had no answer because he'd never actually engaged with the thing he was criticizing. "I thought so," Jeff said softly. "Jimmy, you're attacking something you know nothing about. You're dismissing the work of not just me, but all the incredibly talented musicians I work with, the venues that book us, the audiences that come to hear us play. You're dismissing all of that based on what? Your assumptions." Jimmy tried to regain control. "I don't need to listen to your music to know what this is about. It's about celebrity privilege. It's about thinking you can do whatever you want because you're famous. Celebrity privilege. Jeff's voice carried genuine surprise now. Jimmy, you have your own television show. You have a platform that reaches millions of people every night. You have celebrity privilege. We all do. The question is, what are you doing with it? Jimmy was spiraling now, his carefully constructed television persona completely abandoned. What am I doing with it? I'm trying to ask real questions. I'm trying to cut through the promotional garbage and have authentic conversations. By insulting your guests? Jeff asked. By dismissing their passions? By making them feel unwelcome in your own studio? Jimmy, if this is your idea of authenticity, then maybe you need to reconsider what that word means. The production team was in full panic mode now. Jimmy's producer was making cutting motions across her throat, trying to get Jimmy to wrap this up. But Jimmy was beyond caring about protocol. You know what your problem is, Jeff? Jimmy said, pointing an accusing finger. Your problem is that you think everyone should just bow down to whatever you decide to do. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to call it like I see it. Jeff looked at him with something that might have been pity. Jimmy, I never asked you to bow down to anything. I asked you to have a conversation, but you're not interested in conversation. You're interested in conflict. You're interested in making yourself feel better by making someone else feel worse. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Jeff spread his hands wide. Help me understand, Jimmy. What are you trying to accomplish here? What do you want from this conversation? Jimmy's response was immediate and revealed everything. I want you to admit that this whole jazz thing is just a publicity stunt. The words hung in the air like a confession. Jimmy had finally said what this was really about. Not journalism, not authentic conversation, but his need to tear down something he didn't understand. Jeff stood there for a moment processing what he just heard. And then he did something that no one expected. He started to laugh, not mockingly, not sarcastically, but with genuine amusement. Jimmy, he said, shaking his head, you really think that's what this is? You think I've spent years of my life, invested my own money, worked with incredible musicians, played intimate venues around the world, all for publicity? Jimmy doubled down, his voice desperate now. Yes, that's exactly what I think. You're Jeff Goldblum. You could get publicity 100 different ways, but you chose this because you think it makes you seem sophisticated. Sophisticated? Jeff's laugh grew warmer. Jimmy, do you know what sophisticated means? It means complex, refined, developed through experience. And you know what? If that's what my music has become, then I'm proud of that. But it's not why I do it. Then why? Jimmy demanded as if he'd caught Jeff in some kind of trap. Why do you do it if not for attention? Jeff's response was immediate and devastating in its honesty. Because it brings me joy, Jimmy. Because when I sit at that piano and play with talented musicians, when I see people in the audience connecting with the music, when I feel that moment of creative flow, I experience something beautiful, something pure, something that has nothing to do with cameras or reviews or publicity. The simplicity of it seemed to hit Jimmy like a physical blow. His face went through a series of expressions, confusion, anger, and something that might have been recognition. That's it, Jimmy said, his voice smaller now. That's your big answer. Joy. That's everything, Jimmy, Jeff said gently. Joy is everything. When did you stop understanding that? Jimmy's response was immediate and raw. When I realized that joy doesn't pay the bills. When I realized that in this business you're only as good as your last ratings report. When I realized that guys like you get to play around with hobbies while the rest of us have to actually work for a living. The mask had completely fallen away now. This wasn't about Jeff's music at all. This was about Jimmy's own insecurities, his own fears about his career, his own lost sense of purpose. Jimmy, Jeff said, his voice filled with compassion. When was the last time you did something just because it brought you joy? Not because it was good for the show, not because it would get ratings, but just because it made you happy. Jimmy stared at him, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually answer the question honestly. But then something hardened in his eyes. I don't have time for that luxury, Jeff. Some of us have real responsibilities. Responsibilities? Jeff's voice carried a note of disbelief. Jimmy, you have one of the most coveted jobs in entertainment. You get to talk to fascinating people every night. You get to make people laugh. You get to be part of moments that matter to people. How is that not joyful? Jimmy's response was bitter. Because it's not enough anymore. Because every night I come out here and I have to be funny. I have to be charming. I have to be perfect. And if I'm not, people like you get to go on other shows and talk about how disappointing I am. Jimmy, I've never talked about you on other shows, Jeff said quietly. I've never said a negative word about you to anyone. This conversation we're having right now, this is the first time you and I have ever interacted." The truth of this seemed to hit Jimmy like a revelation. His entire attack had been based on assumptions, on fears, on projections of his own insecurities. "But you," he stammered, "you represent everything that's wrong with this industry. People who get to do whatever they want because they're famous enough to get away with it." Jeff shook his head slowly. "Jimmy, I don't get to do whatever I want. I work for everything I do. I practice piano every day. I rehearse with my band. I study the music I perform. I show up and do the work just like you do. The difference is I found a way to make that work joyful." Jimmy was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I used to love this job." "I know," Jeff said gently. "I can see it in you. Underneath all this anger, I can see someone who used to find joy in making people laugh, in connecting with guests, in being part of something bigger than himself." "But that's not enough anymore," Jimmy said. And there was real pain in his voice now. "Nothing I do is enough anymore." "Jimmy," Jeff said, moving closer. "Can I tell you something? The reason I started playing music wasn't because I thought I was good at it. I started because I was terrible at it. I was so bad that every small improvement felt like a miracle. Every time I could play a song a little better than the day before, it reminded me that growth is possible, that change is possible." Jimmy looked up at him, and for the first time all night, he seemed to be really listening. "When I sit at that piano," Jeff continued, "I'm not Jeff Goldblum, the movie star. I'm not Jeff Goldblum, the celebrity. I'm just someone trying to make something beautiful with other people who care about beauty. And in those moments, I remember who I was before any of this happened. I remember what it felt like to discover something new about myself." Jimmy was crying now, though he was trying to hide it. "I don't know how to do that anymore." "Yes, you do," Jeff said firmly. "You just did it. You just showed me something real about yourself. You just admitted that you're struggling, that you're in pain, that you miss feeling joy in your work. That's not weakness, Jimmy. That's courage." "How?" Jimmy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Jeff. This isn't who I want to be." "I know," Jeff said. "And it's okay. But Jimmy, you can't keep doing this. You can't keep taking your pain out on people who don't deserve it. Your audience doesn't deserve it. Your guests don't deserve it, and you don't deserve it." Jimmy nodded, unable to speak. The studio was completely silent now, everyone witnessing this moment of raw vulnerability. "I think," Jeff said gently, "you need to take some time to figure out what you want this show to be, what you want your life to be. Because right now, you're not serving anyone, including yourself." Jimmy looked around the studio, seeing his crew, his audience, all watching him with concern and confusion. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to fix it tonight," Jeff said. "But you do have to stop making it worse." "Jimmy, I'm going to leave now. Not because I'm angry, but because I think you need space to figure this out." Jimmy nodded again, still unable to find words. Jeff walked over to the piano that was always set up for musical guests. He sat down and played a few gentle, beautiful notes. Nothing complicated, nothing showy, just something peaceful and healing. "Music," he said to the camera, "is about connection. It's about finding something true and sharing it with others. That's all any of us are really trying to do in any field. Find something true and share it." He stood up from the piano and walked toward the exit, but Jimmy called after him. "Jeff, wait." Jeff turned back. "Thank you," Jimmy said quietly, "for not giving up on me, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Jeff smiled that warm, familiar smile. "We all lose our way sometimes, Jimmy. The important thing is finding your way back." As Jeff left the stage, the camera stayed on Jimmy, who stood there for a long moment, looking lost and vulnerable. Finally, he turned to the audience. "I think we're going to end the show here tonight," he said quietly. "I have some things I need to think about." The screen faded to black, and that was the last episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live that Jimmy would host for several months. When he returned, he was different, more thoughtful, more genuine, more connected to the joy he'd lost somewhere along the way. And Jeff Goldblum? He continued making music, continued finding joy in the work, continued proving that it's never too late to discover something new about yourself. Because sometimes the most profound moments happen when we're brave enough to be vulnerable, honest enough to admit our struggles, and generous enough to see the humanity in others, even when they're at their worst. So, what do you think? Have you ever had a moment where someone's kindness helped you see yourself more clearly? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this.